the real notable factors that's been important to us as a winemaking team here at Coonawarra is that our vineyards are different and they vary in how they express flavours and style, and it's given us the opportunity to acknowledge some of these very important Australian Cabernet and Shiraz vineyards and give them some identity and recognition.
Our Cabernet came from Wynns. They had a patch that they'd sent a couple of guys through with a pot of white paint, and old Jock Redmond was the manager then, and he told the boys, put a double white paint on the trunk of any vine that looks like it's good Cabernet. And the next year didn't want to take any cuttings from it, didn't need to, so he said to Dad, send the boys through, but only take cuttings from the vines with that double white paint. Now, I mean, we've got a couple of vineyards planted that material and we've won that many trophies and gold medals with it. There's got to be something good in it. So much so we just call it Magellan selection.
This vineyard is our Wynns Davis vineyard, which was planted in 1957. And it's an important heritage vineyard. It's the second oldest Cabernet in Coonawarra. And you'll note that this particular vine's got a pink ribbon on it, and we've been doing heritage selections in here for the last few years, but this block over time has been an important source for many of the vineyards planted in Coonawarra. It's a really interesting vineyard in that the soils here are very shallow. They're only about 300 millimetres deep, and you'll see through most of the vineyard we've used compost, and in the last 10 years we've needed to introduce some irrigation, some drip irrigation, to help us optimise our fruit from this vineyard.
After 2002 we decided to make some radical changes, and in the better quality vineyards that were the older vineyards where trellises were really in need of repair and the vines really could do with some regeneration, we did some really radical work in terms of cutting the vines off on the trunk and removing all of the top of the vine, and then regrowing the vine from a sucker that came from a dormant bud in the trunk low down, and then retraining the vine totally. We have found that a lot of our very nice single vineyard wines that have been made from Wynns Coonawarra Estate in the last 10 to 12 years have come from these rejuvenated older vineyards, and we're just setting them up for the next 30 years really, and that's been very exciting. In one of our vineyards, the McBain's vineyard, which is north of Coonawarra, for the last 4 years we've been running clonal trials, which we've published in various Australian technical conferences recently, and these clonal trials were able to be undertaken because we had a range of clones planted in the same vineyard covering both Terra Rossa and the Renzina soil types. The interesting thing was that seasonal variation trumps everything, and clones that might not have been in favour in wetter seasons in the 90s have done pretty well in some of the drier seasons that we've experienced in the last 10 or 12 years. So it's been interesting.
The major companies all had head offices in Coonawarra, and so a lot of the trial work that was done nationally was happening in Coonawarra. So most of the senior people in the district were speakers at technical conferences, and a lot of overseas people were coming through Coonawarra as a must-visit place after or before technical conferences. So, as I said before, it was a really exhilarating time to be in the industry, and there was new things happening all the time, and Coonawarra was really on the cutting edge of a lot of these developments. Some of them are real survivors. They've had a lot of different things done to them, and they're still producing really good quality wine. But there is a program of reworking vines, and I mean some of the vines you can see behind me here in the O'Day's vineyard were some of the first vines that were machine pruned, and they were planted in 1971, so yeah, machine pruned probably by 77, and then they've been reworked and new trunks and new trellis installed in the last few years. So it's a It's a continuing maintenance situation with vines.
There is I suppose more of a European tapestry of reworking going on at the moment. So there would have to be somewhere around 500 hectares that's in the process of being renewed, and a lot of that renewal is about changing varieties. So historically, people would plant Chardonnay and Pinot and other varieties within the region, but I think the further that Coonawarra gets along the track, the realisation that it's just so well suited to Cabernet that we really need to focus on Cabernet and seeing how far we can push that. So there's some new clones coming into the country from French Ontave clones and other clones that people are choosing to pull out vineyards that perhaps aren't performing as well as they could be, or to get access to sort of some new planting materials, some different row orientations, some different irrigation techniques or methods. So they might have gone from a dry land block into putting drip systems in order for them to have better control of soil moisture. So it's an interesting time. I think you're starting from scratch. So it's not a decision that's taken lightly. And it's also a decision that you really, the wine industry perhaps historically has had people taking a short-term view. Well, the reality is that it's a long-term industry, that if you're putting a vineyard in the ground, if it's going to be a good vineyard, it's going to be in the ground for 50 to 60 and possibly 100 years. And so you really need to put it in well and make a decision based on all of the information that you can get, like EM38 and soil surveys. We run our own weather station network, and combined with that, we run our own soil moisture monitoring site on each of the vineyards that we manage and a lot of the sub-vintage blocks. So that gives us live information of how the weather conditions, be it rain or sun for that matter, are affecting those particular sites throughout the growing season, so that we're able to react to the seasonal conditions as quickly as possible. We haven't yet got the technology whereby we can individually sort bunches or berries, and so we find that hand picking, the traditional way of picking fruit, has been more beneficial to wine quality. So it's about consistency, because if we can have consistency, we can always blend different bits and pieces into that.
Our best wines, even if driving around this vineyard, we've got the block cut up into vintage blocks, just subdivided. They're all side by side, and the same wines, the same style of wines, are coming from those same blocks every year. I'm not sure that we understand why that's so, but Peter Bissell can see this style or this slight trait in this wine compared with that one and that one from these 8 and 10 acre blocks. There's a lot to be said for growing, for having the right soil, and the quality is really becoming more and more important all the time. I feel very convinced about that.
The first wine I ever tried from down here was the famous 63 Peppermint Patty, and that was the one that really sold me. And I was only 14 at the stage, and I knew then straight away that I really liked the taste of that. My opinion hasn't changed. I went through Owen Redmond, and I spoke to him, and he put me onto the chap who owned this place. It was an opportunity. We took it straight away, and we came down here. I was looking for a new system to tie the canes down and get away from the old wrapping system which we used to do. I guess it is a signature now. It's a system which is called an arched cane. It is in fact a German system. The first year we experimented with the arched caning and did that was 1989. We did a trial of our Shiraz down the back. We certainly didn't want to do it on the highway where everyone could see it. So we did it down the back, and those grapes ripened to absolute perfection that year, even though it was a really wet year, and we were absolutely sold on it from that time on, and so we gradually adapted the whole vineyard over to that system since then. The theory is that it slows the sap flow down, and so therefore we get 100% bud burst of those 10 buds that are on that arch. And so we don't waste any buds at all, and that's why we can prune our vines very hard. We only have 20 buds per vine, which is bugger all, and we get 40 bunches of grapes off that, and we know that each year. So it's a good consistent thing to work with in terms of really keeping a handle on your quality. You know, having been here now for 40 years and having had on the area now probably 8 different clones of Cabernet and probably the similar amounts of Shiraz, you know, we've worked out which clone best suits our environment here. And so we've been going through a process the last 10 years of pulling out a lot of our older vineyards that we did when we first came here. We sort of made mistakes, converting them over to 8 vines per panel rather than 4, the traditional 4 in Coonawarra. The idea of that is to sort of, spread the load over more grape vines, but keep the same number of buds, if you like, per panel, but double up the number of vines. And sort of the theory there is that, you know, we're not putting as much strain on each actual vine, but we're not also overproducing in terms of grapes. Our daughter Emma, who graduated from Wagga in 1993, came and joined us for, I think it was the 98 vintage. And she's now basically taking over the position of winemaker with a lot of assistance from her father, of course. And that's really good. Probably got about another 10 years, I reckon, to complete my cycle and get it so that when I finally shuffle off, I can hand over a pretty decent vineyard, hopefully the best vineyard in Coonawarra.
We know after many years of making wines from these special vineyards that they do have their own characteristics, or terroir as it's often referred to, and they taste different than the small plot of vines or vineyard or block next to it, and therefore they make different wines. So many different little parcels in Coonawarra, all with their own story and character and flavour. It's really exciting for winemakers to be able to pick these different parcels and feel the different characters of the region, but expressed slightly differently, and select one to tell the Coonawarra story.